Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for Grenzebach Lear & Associates webinar series presents Leveraging Social Media to Grow Your Annual Fund, presented by the most recent addition to our firm, Dan Allenby, Vice President for Annual Giving. Dan brings to GG&A nearly 15 years of experience in annual giving, marketing, and development. Most recently, he served as the Director of Annual Giving Strategy and Operations at Tufts University during its $1.2 billion Beyond Boundaries campaign. During his time at Tufts, the annual fund grew by 21%, and in 2009, the university completed its most successful annual giving year in its history. Prior to joining Tufts, Dan also led annual giving and marketing programs at Georgetown University, Boston College, National Geographic, and American University. He currently serves on the board of directors at the Friday Forum, a Boston-based organization that develops philanthropy education programs and writes a popular blog entitled The Annual Giving Exchange. In today's session, Dan will discuss how traditional annual giving programs have evolved over the past decade and consider the ways that social media has changed the way fundraisers interact with prospects and donors. He will examine the characteristics and opportunities of specific social media platforms, including Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter, focusing on the ways constituent engagement and gift potential can be measured through social media, and conclude by sharing examples of how social media can be leveraged to grow your annual fund. A question and answer session will take place after the presentation. Please use the chat function on the right-hand side of your screen, select all participants, and send Dan your questions. Please feel free to keep your chat up throughout the presentation and share your thoughts and questions with your fellow attendees. This coming Monday, we will send a recording of the session along with the presentation slides and a short survey to gain your feedback. Thank you all again for joining us today, and now I will turn it over to Dan.
Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you for everybody who's joining us here today. As Stephanie said, the subject today is leveraging social media to grow your annual fund. So let's jump right in. I'm going to talk for the next 45 minutes about annual giving and how it's evolved. Talk specifically about Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. Although there are many different social media platforms, these three are probably the best place to start. And then the core of the presentation is going to discuss 7 guidelines that annual giving managers should be following to leverage social media to help grow their annual fund. At the end of the presentation, I'm going to provide a few examples from real organizations and how they've begun to incorporate social media into their annual giving programs. And as I said, at the end, we'll have an opportunity for questions. But following the presentation, I invite anybody to contact me directly. I'd be happy to discuss anything that we've gone over in the presentation and talk with you on an individual basis about how you can incorporate social media into your annual giving programs. I'd like to begin by talking about what I think an annual giving manager's mission really is, and I think this is often misunderstood. A lot of annual giving managers think that it's their job to just solicit prospects as often as they can, but annual giving is far more complex than that, and I think there are really 4 jobs that an annual giving manager has. And the first is to define and promote a case for support for the annual fund, to really articulate the impact of gifts to the annual fund and how that helps an organization grow. An annual fund manager is also responsible for identifying prospects that can help give to the annual fund. Thirdly, an annual fund manager, and I think this is probably the most important job, is to create opportunities for people to give. Direct mail and phone calls don't convince people to give. People make decisions to support institutions that are important to them for reasons that are personal to them, but an annual giving manager can create opportunities for people to support those organizations in a way and at a time that's right for them. And lastly, number 4, an annual fund manager is responsible for stewarding those donors and those gifts, making sure that those gifts are appreciated and that the impact of those gifts is demonstrated. Seth Godin is a widely known marketing guru. He is a writer of the most popular marketing blog in the world, and he's published a number of books. In 2008, he wrote a book called Tribes. In this book, he suggested that people form tribes around brands and organizations and causes that are important to them. And this is significant, Seth Godin says, because it really redefines the way that marketers need to think about their constituents. He suggests that marketers shouldn't look for customers for their products, but instead should seek out products for the tribes. I think this idea really translates into annual giving, too. We have tribes in annual giving. Obviously, donors, volunteers, and staff represent groups of people that are critical to the mission of an annual giving program. But as an annual giving manager, you need to ask yourself what tribes exist for your annual fund. And more importantly, who's leading these tribes? Who are the influencers? Who are the agents of trust, the people that the members of the tribe look to for leadership? And that's not necessarily you as the annual fund manager. You should be looking to the members of your tribe and the influencers and the trust agents to help you understand the tribe better. So are you watching and are you listening to what these tribes are telling you? Let's talk a minute about the evolution of annual giving before we get specifically into social media, because I think this is an important, it's important to really see in context where annual funds have developed over the past several years, and they've really evolved. Phone-a-thon programs naturally are a good starting point. They're a traditional and fundamental part of most annual giving programs. But the fact is, it's not a cheap way to raise money. It requires a very significant investment of human resources and budget resources. And the truth is, it's getting harder and harder to reach people through the phone. Data suggests that in the past few years, the number of attempts that's required to actually complete a phone call has increased 50%. Because phone-a-thons are not inexpensive, we really need to think about how we're segmenting and who we're deciding to reach out to through our phone-a-thon to make sure that we're using our budgetary resources properly. Now, technology has been both an asset and a liability to phone-a-thon programs. Over a decade ago, a lot of programs started to use software to automate their programs that allowed them to be more efficient. But then the emergence of caller ID made it more difficult to contact some people because constituents and donors were able to see who was calling them on the phone. A lot of questions are emerging even in recent years about the impact of mobile phone technology. And even in the past few weeks, we've seen the real potential of text fundraising, specifically in the aftermath of the horrible tragedy in Haiti. So what I would leave you with is that balance and integration are really important to the future success of a phone-a-thon program. Balancing not just the amount of money that you're going to invest in your program, but how well you're integrating your phone-a-thon program into other channels. If someone were to ask me what I think the future of a phone-a-thon is, I'd be looking very closely at virtual call centers and the ability to actually empower people to talk to one another without necessarily having to be in one room. Like the phone-a-thon, direct mail has also been a core source of revenue and donors for most annual giving programs. But as annual giving evolves, direct mail has got some real challenges too. There's the obvious perception that it's wasteful and not exactly environmentally friendly. But there's budgetary issues that people need to consider also. Postage costs have increased 33% over the past 10 years. And what we're seeing is that direct mail is actually attracting fewer donors, but those donors that are giving at a higher rate. This is a picture of T. Boone Pickens. A lot of you might be familiar with him, the Oklahoma billionaire who made his money in the oil business. And he's been a real public advocate of looking to alternative sources of energy to fuel the world economy. And I think there's a good metaphor for us in annual giving to consider here. And that is direct mail really a sustainable source of revenue and donors for your annual fund program? I think we need to be looking at alternatives, and the obvious alternative is email. It's very similar in the way that it operates to direct mail, but it's less expensive and it's very measurable. We're going to talk about social media more in just a minute, but I think one thing to understand is that there's data to show that heavy email users are also heavy users of social media. A really important characteristic of email is that it requires permission, and I think we need to stop and think about what this means. Unlike direct mail, where you can communicate with people broadly, you really have to have one's permission in order to be able to market to them. So I think the same applies to social media, but we need to be really sensitive that somebody's given us their email address. Also, email is a key driver of online giving. And in 2008, the Association of Fundraising Professionals conducted a survey of over 200 nonprofit organizations from across various sectors. And according to that survey, less than 10% of donations were made online last year. But while that's a very small piece of the pie, compared to Phone-a-thon and direct mail, online giving really is the only channel that's showing growth. What also needs to be considered in online giving is that it fulfills all four aspects of an annual giving manager's mission. It allows you to promote the case for support and create a buzz, identify prospects, create opportunities to give. Online giving is actually one of the most convenient and quickest ways for a donor to be able to support their organization. It also gives us an opportunity to steward gifts at the same time. Which brings us to social media, the topic of today's discussion. And social media has certainly created a buzz in recent years. The Obama presidential campaign certainly demonstrated that it can be a very powerful tool, not just for mobilizing volunteers, but for building a campaign around. And there is a number of different social media channels and platforms, and we're seeing new ones emerge every day. But let's take a second to stop and think about what social media means, because I think it's really introducing a new way to think about your donors and your constituents. It's not simply the old annual giving strategy of soliciting people and making the case for support, but there's really an element of online engagement that we need to be considering. There's a lot of skeptics of social media as it applies to fundraising, because at this point there's really no data to show that social media really is a really useful tool. There's not a lot of hard data to show how much money it allows an organization to raise. So to that, I actually would put up this example. This picture here is of Willie Sutton. For those of you who aren't familiar with Willie, he was a bank robber at the turn of the century who spent his entire career robbing banks. And urban legend has it that near the end of his career, a reporter asked him, "Willie, why do you rob banks?" And he said, "Because that's where the money is." And I'd say the same thing to an annual giving manager who was skeptical about social media. If there's no data to show that social media actually is a helpful tool in raising money, why should we be using it? And the answer is because that's where your donors are. I was talking to a colleague the other day, and they made a really good point in that about 10 years ago, when the internet boom was really taking off, there was a lot of skepticism about the effectiveness of online advertising. But today, online advertising represents a really core element of most marketing programs. This is a screenshot here of Mark Andreessen. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Mark, he was the architect of Mosaic, which was the foundation of the first popular internet browser, Netscape. And Mark has continued to be a real figurehead and thought leader in the IT industry. And he was interviewed on Charlie Rose about 2 years ago. Mark is currently on the board of Facebook and eBay. He's the founder of a social media platform called Ning, which if you haven't heard of it, you're going to be hearing a lot more about it. It's a platform that allows organizations to create social networks on their own without having to leverage existing platforms like Facebook and LinkedIn. And when he was on Charlie Rose, Charlie said, "Mark, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, how many of these networks should I belong to?" And his answer was really profound. He said, "Charlie, that depends on how many things are important to you." And I think the message here is that what's going on in social media is that people are connecting and identifying with other people and organizations that are important to them offline, and that social media is really just a reflection of what's taking place in their everyday lives. People are identifying with causes and they're loyal to organizations that are important to them offline. And I think we need to keep this in mind as we're thinking about how to use social media for annual giving. This is Robin Dunbar. He's a British social anthropologist who's dedicated his entire life to researching the capacity for human relationships. He wanted to know, is there a limit to the number of relationships that an individual can have? And he concluded that that number actually does exist, and that it's 150, that the human mind and that human beings can only form and sustain 150 relationships, 150 friendships. And we're seeing that number start to be applied in a number of different areas. In military companies, they often choose 150 as the limit to the number of soldiers they want in a particular company, because they want each soldier to know one another, especially in times of war where there might be a stranger among them. Gift officer portfolios actually reflect this number as well. 150 is the most popular or the most commonly used gift officer portfolio number. So I think social media asks an interesting question, one that I don't necessarily have the answer for today, but I think it's important to consider, and that is, does social media support or does it challenge the Dunbar number? Does it really present a limit to the number of relationships people can have online, or is it giving us the tools to expand beyond that? Let's take a minute to talk about Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter, because I think as we're beginning to think about how to apply social media in annual giving, this is really the best place to start. I call them the big three. The first is Facebook. Facebook has over 350 million active users. If it was a country, it would be the third largest country in the world. The average user on Facebook has 130 friends, which goes to support Dunbar's number. And while a lot of people think of Facebook as something that young adults use and teenagers use, the reality is that everybody's using it. The fastest growing segment within Facebook is 35 to 54-year-olds. There are a number of different tools that we should be familiar with as we're thinking about Facebook. The first of which is profiles, and I imagine most of you have a profile for yourself on Facebook, and that allows us to connect with other individuals and have relationships with them online. Facebook also offers the group application, where people can join or form a tribe around a specific cause. And there's three kinds of groups. Open groups, anybody can join. Closed groups, you need to have permission and be accepted into the group. And secret groups, you can't even find if you do a search on Facebook. And these groups really provide platforms for people or for tribes to have discussions around a particular cause. Fan pages, it's interesting, as Facebook has evolved over the past couple of years, the application of fan pages has become more clear. And what it really is it's an opportunity for brands and organizations, so not necessarily individuals, to create a presence online and to communicate with their constituents. Facebook offers the opportunity to do targeted ads to a particular demographic, and it also offers an application called Causes, which provides fundraisers with an infrastructure and an ability to actually receive and to process gifts online. LinkedIn has more than 55 million users, and while a lot of people think of it as a job search tool, it's really more than just a way to find your next job. Like Facebook, LinkedIn has a number of tools. The contacts in your LinkedIn network are really a replication of your Rolodex. It allows you to see the people you're connected with and, in a professional sense, see their work experience and their background and connect directly to them. LinkedIn also has a group application, which is even more robust than in Facebook. And people can create groups through LinkedIn, and you can communicate directly and see information with other people in your group. Along with groups, I think one of the real added values of LinkedIn is that there is an email digest that's sent out on a regular basis, which to all members of groups, which shows the recent discussions that have taken place within that group, and that might include news, jobs, or discussions. LinkedIn also offers some interesting analytics tools, so you can get a better sense of who the people in your network look like, what their demographics are. And this is really helpful, especially in fundraising, as we're trying to understand more about groups. Twitter is the third social media platform and probably the newest and the most exciting, but also the most misunderstood. There are currently 75 million Twitter accounts, but of that, only 17% of them were actually used last month. And Twitter is a microblog. It's mainly for broadcasting short messages and links. And what makes Twitter unique is that it actually has a search functionality about it, which allows people to sort of get a sense of what people are talking about and what they're blogging about. Eric Schmidt, the CEO of Google, calls Twitter poor man's email. But there's a lot of people that think that Twitter might actually, as it refines itself as an application, be something to take on the new leading role in searchability. You can search what people are talking about based on subjects. Some of the tools that Twitter offers, hashtag, the pound sign in front of any particular keyword, allows people to search on that word. Retweeting allows people to, in a really simple way, repost within their own Twitter account something that somebody else has talked about, and really supports the idea of viral marketing. Twitter also offers lists. This is a new application, so you can see different lists that particular people or organizations are following. So if you're interested in a particular topic, you can actually look and get a list of other things that are associated with it. And for those of you who are having a real hard time understanding Twitter, TweetDeck is an application. It's a desktop application, and it's separate from Twitter. This is a screenshot of what it looks like. But what it allows for is to create on your desktop different columns, and you can identify keywords that will allow you to search. So, for instance, you're seeing 4 columns here. One column you might want to search on a word like phonathon, and it would allow you to see all the Twitter activity that mentions the word phonathon. So Twitter, in many ways, too, is becoming an interesting market research tool. And an annual giving manager who's interested in following discussions related to their organization or to their annual fund might want to consider TweetDeck as an option. So now that we've talked about the evolution of annual giving and some of the basic tools that are available in the major social media platforms, I'd like to suggest 7 guidelines for annual giving managers and how they can begin to think about using social media within your annual fund. And again, I'd like to say that this is really a new way of thinking about annual fundraising. And what we need to come back to is those fundamental 4 principles of what our job is, to create a buzz about annual giving, and to identify prospects, and more importantly, to create opportunities to give and to steward donors after they've done so. So the first step is to take inventory. I have a lot of people ask me, should we create an annual fund Facebook fan page? And I don't think that the answer is necessarily yes. What I do think you need to do is to stop and identify the different tribes and the different groups that have already self-identified themselves through these different social media platforms. And people might organize themselves around particular causes or geographic regions. If you're a school or college or a university, people might be organizing themselves around classes or sports or different academic majors. So step 1 is to really look around and see what already exists. Write them down. Create a table so that you know what's available. I think you'll be surprised to find that there's not just dozens, but possibly hundreds of different groups that have self-organized themselves around your organization or your cause. And after you've done that, take some time to build partnerships. The job of an annual giving manager is really a partnership marketing manager in many ways. So the public relations department at your organization might be managing a Facebook fan page for your organization as a whole. So get to know them, reach out to them, let them know that you're an annual fund manager and that you're an advocate for annual giving. The alumni relations department, if you're a school, college, or university, might have built a alumni relations platform or group on a social media platform, so get to know them as well. Build partnerships with your advancement communications team, in particular the print people, because print people are really good at telling stories. And then, not just the official sponsored managers of social media groups that already exist, but look at the non-sponsored student and alumni or affinity groups that already exist too. This is where you're going to really find some untapped potential. And again, you don't necessarily have to build a social media presence from scratch, but your job is to really identify what already exists and then find ways to communicate and create a buzz and create opportunities to give within those groups. Once you've done so, you need to think about content. What are you really going to start to promote on these different social media platforms? And a lot of times that's done through links. And you don't necessarily have to recreate the wheel. Try to link to existing content that might exist on your advancement website. Look at celebrating stories that celebrate memorable gifts that have already happened or particular donors who have been supportive of your organization. Look for stories that demonstrate the impact of gifts. And most importantly, in your links, always create a link to the online giving form. Because again, one of our jobs as annual giving managers is to create opportunities for people to give. And social media and online and the internet provides the most convenient way for people to do that. You'll see up under the first bullet in parentheses I put bit.ly, and that is a website that I highly recommend you spend some time looking at, and it allows you to take really long URLs that already exist and shorten them and track them so you can see how many people are clicking on them. In developing content, there's some other guidelines you should follow. Try to create a sense of urgency. For example, if it's coming to the end of your fiscal year, you might want to suggest that it's the last chance to make a gift in fiscal year 2010. Also look for opportunities to promote competition among alumni classes or rival schools. But most importantly, and this doesn't just apply to Twitter, be concise. Remember that when people are participating online, particularly in social media, there's a lot of activity going on. So don't be wordy. Have a call to action and link to existing content. Number 4 is to create and maintain a schedule. Once you've identified content and you've identified the platforms, think about how often you want to utilize these to promote your annual fund and to provide people with opportunities to give. And actually write this down. Create a grid. Create a schedule just like you would for direct mail or your phone-a-thon and integrate it into that. Share it with your partners. Let them know what you're thinking in terms of your plans to integrate or promote your annual fund message through social media platforms. In terms of frequency, I don't think there's a right answer, but don't be afraid to be aggressive. Posting a message on a Facebook fan page every month isn't too frequent. Integrate these messages with other channels. The messages that you have in direct mail, in email, and in your phone-a-thon should also be supported through these social media channels so that they're integrated and coordinated. And again, utilize bit.ly, and there's some other applications as well, to really start thinking about these messages and tracking them through different links. The 5th step is to mobilize and empower volunteers. Politics aside, I think that we could all agree that the recent presidential campaign of Barack Obama really was a good example of how powerful social media could be. But what was really going on there is I think social media was being used as a tool to mobilize volunteers around a particular cause. I've often joked that I think David Axelrod, Obama's campaign manager, would have made an excellent director of annual giving, because in many ways what he was doing is he was running a big class agent campaign. So as you're thinking about recruiting volunteers, you're going to have a lot of different criteria you're going to think about. But don't be afraid to recruit volunteers or think about recruiting volunteers who are actively participating in social media. Consider those who already have large social media networks of their own. But don't just recruit them. Give them some direction. Provide them with content. You're developing a wealth or a bank of content, but give them ideas about what they can post, and set goals for them. For example, if you're recruiting class agents for a class agent campaign, ask them to post on their different social media platforms that they're using already 10 different annual fund related messages, but not just give. Help them share stories of impact, of gift impact, and share stories of memorable gifts. Incorporate their activity into your own marketing schedule too. Don't just coordinate a schedule that reflects the activity that you're managing as an annual fund director, but have it reflect and integrate all of the different activity that's taking place across your volunteer networks. And you can see where this really becomes a very complex program to manage. But I think in the end, in terms of creating a buzz about the annual fund, that's really the goal. And working through volunteers is a critical step in doing that. Step number 6 is, this is really targeted to annual fund managers themselves, become an evangelist. Promote content on non-advancement platforms, but also promote the use of social media for your donors. This isn't just about, what can I do on social media platforms to promote the annual fund, but get your donors who you're communicating with on a regular basis excited about social media, not just the social media that's promoting the annual fund, but get them engaged. Here's an idea. Include your organization's Facebook and Twitter URLs on your business cards. Get people involved that way. And just as important as getting volunteers involved and donors involved, encourage advancement management, your directors of development, and your vice presidents to use social media. There's a real buzz out there about it, and everybody's curious. But I think the more people become familiar with it, the more likely it's going to be supported and integrated into your annual fund strategies. The last step, step number 7, is to monitor and measure your activity. Remember here that giving is an outcome of good engagement. So annual fund managers shouldn't just be focused on soliciting gifts. They should be focused on engaging donors, and social media is a great platform to do that. but social media also provides a great opportunity to measure and assess the extent of this engagement. So as you're creating this inventory, this list of all of the different groups and fan pages that exist out there, whether they're sponsored or not sponsored by your organization, take count of how many fans exist on those, how many followers you have in Twitter, how many members of different groups in LinkedIn and Facebook exist. Write it down and track it over time. Write it down today, and then in 3 or 4 months, check back to see which of these groups are really gaining momentum. See where there's a lot of activity, because you want to be promoting your annual fund on platforms where there is a lot of activity. And if there's a particular platform which isn't showing a lot of activity, that might not be the best place for you to be investing your time and your energy. Follow comments. When you post annual fund-related stories on these different platforms, there's a dialogue going on, and people are likely going to comment back. And what this really allows for is a great market research tool for annual giving managers. Speaking of tools, every day we're seeing new tools emerge that allow people to measure activity that's going on online. Google has a great analytics tool which you can apply to your website. I'm sure it's already integrated into a lot of your organization's online giving forms. But try to see where people are coming from when they're visiting your giving page or they're visiting your annual giving stories, who's referring them, and then where they're going to. Within Facebook, Facebook Insights is an application that allows you to measure and look at the different demographics, whether it's geography or gender or age of the people that are participating in these groups. KDPayne.com is a great blog, which I recommend to everybody here to take some time to look at. And on that website, you're going to learn more about ways to measure and to analyze social media. So now I'd like to take just another 5 or 10 minutes and share some examples with each of you about how these social media platforms have been applied in real annual fund programs. Starting with Boston College. Last year, an anonymous donor pledged $500,000 to the university if the alumni giving rate were able to be increased by 2%. And so the annual fund staff and the communications staff took this challenge and said, how can we best leverage it? And what they decided to do was to really create an online engagement and social media marketing campaign. And they recruited Father Neenan. Father Neenan is a beloved campus figure. He's an 80-year-old Jesuit who all students, or most students, are very fond of. And they created a profile for Father Neenan on Facebook. They also created a landing page on the advancement website which explained what this challenge was about. They created a Facebook fan page around the Neenan Challenge, and they created a Twitter feed. And once they had done this, they organized a very aggressive schedule to push out emails and to mobilize volunteers to promote this campaign. And after doing so, they actually had a lot of success and exceeded the campaign goal. And they've decided to continue this campaign into the next year. As Stephanie mentioned, I'm coming to GGNA most recently from Tufts University. And before I left, a project that my team worked on was taking the university's annual President's Appeal. Now, this mailing has been going on for over 10 years, and it is a university-wide mailing, so it goes to alumni, parents, and friends of all 6 campuses. And traditionally, it's really just been done through direct mail, but we wanted to test to see how we could take the content of that and promote it through social media. So we took the letter, which mailed in early November, and we took the content of it, and you'll see the picture here as a President Larry Bacow of Tufts University, and the text of the letter. We created a landing page and a custom URL, so it was really easy to identify and to share. Then we developed a partner database of all the different administrators of Tufts-related fan pages, whether they were the Public Relations Department who was managing the Tufts University fan page and Twitter feed, or whether they were non-sponsored groups which had been started by alumni themselves. So we created this database, and then a week after the mailing, the annual fund staff sent an email and reached out directly to these partners, and they asked them to post a link on the website. And we saw a huge increase in activity, and it really just allowed people to not only engage and get a sense and get a chance to hear from the president himself, but we also provided people with a link to the giving page on the landing page, and we saw an increase of gifts as well. So here's another example from Tufts University, and this is a rather unique example, but I think one that should be considered as you're thinking about new and creative ways to test the use of social media in your annual fund. And at Tufts University, there are, as I said, 6 schools, and it's relatively decentralized. Each school is managing its own annual giving program and communicating and supporting annual giving efforts on their own. The Central Annual Fund staff serves a number of different functions, and one of them is managing the Phone-a-thon program on behalf of the different schools. But one of the real challenges that the Central Annual Fund faced is that it was difficult to communicate and update all of the different Phone-a-thon activity back out to the schools in a timely fashion. So what they did, the Assistant Director of Annual Giving created a Twitter page specifically for the Phone-a-thon. Now, he only allowed people to follow this page if they were staff members themselves or approved volunteers. But several times a day, he would do a tweet to let them know who had been called the night before or any monumental pledges that they had received. And it became a great communications tool. So an annual fund director at the medical school, for example, who was interested in finding out in real time how the program had done that night, would simply just log into Twitter and would see an update in real time. So the last example I'd like to share with you is a third-party fee-for-service application called Donor Badge. And now Donor Badge is very cutting edge, and I think you're going to see a number of these emerge in the coming years. But it's an application that works like this. A nonprofit subscribes to Donor Badge and then integrates the tool into their existing online giving infrastructure. Then a donor goes to the online giving site and makes a gift to that nonprofit. After doing so, a badge appears, which is really just the nonprofit's logo, and it's displayed on the donor's Facebook profile. The donor is then prompted to share the news of the gift with their friends through email, and a message is sent to those friends along with a link to the nonprofit's online giving form. Tracking and analysis is provided through Donor Badge. And this was used, one of the first clients of Donor Badge was the University of California, Berkeley. And after doing it, they saw some really impressive results. Facebook became the top 5 source of traffic for the online giving page at the university. It found that the actual Donor Badge tool was used by 10 to 15% of the donors. 1 to 1.5 friend visits to the online giving website per donor occurred. And they saw after analyzing the results that more than 50% of the donors through Donor Badge were new donors to the university. So in conclusion today, I'd like to recommend a few resources that I think could be helpful to any annual giving manager who's trying to get a better understanding of how to leverage and utilize social media for their own programs. The first is Mashable.com. Which is a very popular blog with probably 10 to 20 articles posted on a daily basis. And it's going to give you a sense of really how all kinds of organizations, not just nonprofits, are utilizing social media. It's going to talk about best practices or cutting-edge technology. But if you're somebody who's interested in getting a better understanding of what's going on in the social media space, I would bookmark Mashable.com and do some reading there on a regular basis. I mentioned Seth Godin earlier. Seth Godin is a very popular blogger. He writes about marketing, but a lot of the ideas that he's talking about and writing about are very applicable in the annual giving space. I mentioned KDPayne.com as a great tool for measuring the impact and the activity that's taking place online. Quoncast.com will give you a sense of what different trends and demographics are occurring within each of the different social media platforms. And bit.ly, I mentioned, is a great tool for creating shortened links from existing longer links. And this is really something that you should be utilizing when you're creating the schedule and you're developing content. It's going to give you, as an annual fund manager, a chance to really track and get a sense of what's happening and what's taking place in each of your different promotional activities. And lastly, I have on here, Stephanie mentioned that I write a blog myself as part of Grenzebach Lear & Associates called the Annual Giving Exchange. And it's a blog that's specifically written for annual fund managers, talking about best practices and emerging trends in annual giving. And it's to provide an opportunity for people to think about best practices and how you can apply that to your program. So I'd like to open it up for questions in just a minute, but let me sort of say in hindsight that social media really represents a new way of thinking about annual giving. It's going to involve thinking beyond the traditional direct marketing techniques, and it's going to involve being an evangelist for social media internally. Don't be afraid to take chances or to try new things. And in terms of the fundamental ways that you as an annual giving manager can incorporate social media into your annual giving programs, I offered you 7 steps. First of all, take inventory. Second, build partnerships. Thirdly, develop content. Fourth, create and maintain a schedule. Number 5, mobilize and empower volunteers. Number 6, become an evangelist for social media, both internally and externally. And finally, monitor and measure. The business of annual giving is a very quantifiable one, and I think the more that you're able to show and measure constituent engagement and annual giving activity online, it's only going to help you make the case for further investment in social media marketing programs going forward. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Stephanie, and I would open up for any questions that you have. I'd be happy to answer them.
Great, Dan. Thank you. We've received quite a few questions over the course of your presentation, so we'll go ahead and dive right in. Our first question, in regards to Phone-a-thon, you made a brief mention to virtual call centers. Can you describe in more detail what a virtual call center is and its functionality?
Sure. Well, in the traditional sense, a phone-a-thon program or a call center involves getting students or volunteers in a room in front of phones and providing them with a list of people to call and to solicit for gifts or just to reach out to and say thank you for your past support. And as I mentioned, the business of telemarketing has had a lot of different trends over the past several years, and technology has been both an asset and a liability. But I think in terms of how technology is going to be a real asset for phone-a-thon programs in the future, as people are increasingly using mobile phone technology and as software applications exist for automating calling programs, you're going to see that people are going to be able to, or annual fund managers are going to be able to manage phone-a-thon programs where they don't have to physically have people in one room. People can actually be, in the same way that I'm broadcasting this webinar to people all over the country and the world, people are going to be able to solicit gifts and to reach out to constituents from their own homes or from their own offices, and people don't necessarily need to be limited by the physical space that they're in.
Great. Thank you, Dan. You briefly touched on blogs. Can you briefly describe blogs as a form of social media to help grow your annual fund?
Sure. Blogging in the simplest sense is really an opportunity for a person with a particular voice to talk about an issue that's important to them. In a lot of ways, a blog is just like a newspaper or a magazine, except the author or the journalist isn't necessarily relying on the infrastructure of that magazine to communicate their message and their ideas. There are a lot of applications that allow people to become bloggers that are free to them. WordPress.com, Typepad.com, or Blogger.com are probably the 3 most popular. And in terms of applications for blogs for an annual giving manager, I mentioned one earlier in the Tufts example with Jumbo Phone, which was really just setting up a Twitter feed, and Twitter is in itself a microblog where you can post messages and links on a particular topic. But I'd also encourage annual giving managers to start blogs themselves. They can write these blogs, and it's probably a helpful way for them to collect content and share ideas with anybody who's interested in reading about those ideas online.
Great. What research is available out there to help gather people's social media information?
Research that's available. As I think in one of my last slides, I pointed to the number 4 bullet here. Quantcast.com is a great aggregate of social media analytic data, and it'll talk about the different demographics and user activity that's taking place on all of the social media platforms. So you can get a sense of, from day to day, how many current Facebook users there are, and where they're geographically distributed, what their gender is, and other demographic characteristics. It's also going to talk about user rates. So I mentioned earlier that Twitter has got 75 million users, but only 17% of them are actually using it. And that's the kind of data that you can find on Quantcast.com.
Great. Should we create a social media policy before using it in our annual fund?
That's a great question, and actually one that's on a lot of people's minds. Social media policies, my answer to that is that I don't think you need to create a separate social media policy. Oftentimes, what people are looking for already exists in their human resources handbook. In other words, people are participating online and they're communicating, they're engaging with other people, and they're really empowered. They're given a voice, and I think a lot of organizations become a little bit frightened about what people could say, and there's a tendency to want to control that. But in terms of what people say, it shouldn't be limited, shouldn't be seen any differently in the social media space than it would offline. I actually, when I think about social media policy, I like to point to an example that's outside of the development advancement world, and that's at Intel. Intel was really struggling with their social media policy. They wanted to be able to provide guidelines to their employees and their customers in terms of what they were going to say about the company in these different social media platforms. And what they came up with was called the good, the bad, but not the ugly. And it basically was the company's position saying, you can use these social media platforms to talk about our company. And we're going to be okay with anything you say, obviously, that's good about the company. And we're even going to be comfortable if you have some criticisms of the company and you say something that's negative about the company. But what we're not going to tolerate is anybody saying anything that's off topic or just downright ugly. So I think the two things I would say about social media policy are, look at your human resources handbook that already exists, and the parameters or the guidelines that they're offering or that are presented to employees or constituents in general about how to behave whenever they're interacting in public. I would say those apply online as well. And secondly, the good is okay and the bad is okay, but not the ugly.
Great. Thank you, Dan. Would you say that social media is killing email?
I said earlier in the presentation that that there's actually a lot of data to show that email use, that heavy social media users are also heavy email users. And I would say that that the two really go hand in hand. Social media in many ways really relies on email to fuel it and to power that. And you'll see the integration of email with a lot of the social media applications. For example, LinkedIn offers the opportunity to create groups and host discussions and interactions by particular groups around a particular topic. But you don't have to necessarily be logged into LinkedIn to get that. So every week, if you're a member, actually, for example, there's an annual giving exchange group that I have that's part of my social media presence for the firm's blog. And anybody who is interested in being part of a group where you can discuss annual giving best practices and issues related to annual giving can join this group in LinkedIn and have a discussion. But by being part of that group, you'll also find that either every day or every week, it's up to you, you'll get a digested email that is an update of everything that's been discussed during that week. So you'll see that email and social media really do work together. In a lot of ways, email is the fuel that helps do a lot of the marketing of social media. But I think you're going to find that that's a relationship that's going to evolve over time.
Dan, can you discuss the value of personal URLs and how they can impact your annual fund?
Pearls, sure. That's a good question, too. I think Pearls are a way to really customize a URL to a particular individual person. And I think that really speaks to the personal relationship that people are looking for online. A lot of times direct mail includes a Pearl. So it could be, if I went to Tufts University, for example, tufts.edu/Dan Allenby. And one might, an annual giving manager might decide to send a postcard out and invite me to visit their online community, their hosted online community. And that allows me to sort of get a sense that this is a very personal communication to me. And then when I click on that URL, I'm going to have a customized individual experience, specifically speaking to the things that are important to me, based on the information that that organization already has on me in their database.
Do you know if Donor Badge intends to expand beyond Facebook?
I actually don't know the exact answer to that question, but I would imagine that it does. Donor Badge is a very progressive company, and I know is constantly evolving and thinking about the best way that its products and services can help its clients. So I know that they've started in Facebook, and I believe they have some applications that apply to Twitter as well. But I'd spend some time at DonorBadge.com getting a sense of what that product looks like to find out if it's the right product for you, and to contact the company if you'd want some more information.
Great. We have a few more questions coming in with regards to Facebook. How useful are Facebook causes?
Another good question. Early on as nonprofit managers and fundraisers and annual giving managers were looking for ways to utilize social media, causes emerged as a potential opportunity to raise money. And what Causes does is it allows an organization to do gift processing. So what I would say about Facebook Causes is that if you are an organization that does not have an existing infrastructure for processing and tracking gifts, and a lot of universities and a lot of hospitals are the kinds of organizations that already have pretty robust gift processing departments. They have large databases and they have large systems already in place for processing gifts. If you are not one of those organizations, if you're perhaps a small nonprofit that doesn't have a gift processing team or doesn't have a way to process gifts online, Facebook Causes could be incredibly helpful in that it provides you with that gift processing infrastructure. And the way it works is that through Facebook, people can actually contribute to a particular cause, and then Facebook will process those gifts through credit card, through their credit card companies, and send one aggregate check back to that nonprofit. The downside to that is that it makes accounting for those gifts. You're only getting one check, and that's representing giving from many different people. And that's a real challenge for people, for the organizations in terms of stewardship and follow-up. There's really no solution in place for that organization to be able to follow up with each of those individual donors, and really no way for them to actually send tax receipts to those donors as well. So I think if my recommendation would be that Facebook Causes is certainly something to be paying attention to and to thinking about, but the real benefit of Facebook Causes is probably for those organizations that don't have an existing gift processing infrastructure in place.
Great. And can or should you sync your messages with Facebook and Twitter?
Another good question. I mentioned TweetDeck earlier as a great solution, a great way to track activity and to do searches of the different content and the different conversations that are taking place through Twitter. But what TweetDeck and other similar applications allow you to do is to sync messages. So I could sync my Facebook account with my Twitter account, and then if I post something on my Facebook account, it's also going to show up in my Twitter account. But there's a debate going on right now as to whether or not that's a good use of social media. Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter, again, there's many more different social media platforms, but they're all very, very unique in their own right. And so oftentimes people are using Facebook for one purpose, and they're using Twitter or LinkedIn for another. For example, on my own personal Facebook profile, I really limit the relationships that I have there to my immediate friends and my family. For example, I like to post pictures of my kids on my Facebook page. So I want to be very careful about who's able to see those pictures, and I limit it. So I tend not to include in my Facebook network my professional relationships. I hold that and reserve that for LinkedIn. And in LinkedIn, what you see there are not personal relationships per se, or there's going to be some overlap. But I use LinkedIn really as a way to manage my professional relationships. And so I think in terms of syncing messaging across the two, it might sound like it's convenient, but I think you need to be careful about how you do it, because the tribes that might exist in your Facebook platform could be very different than the tribe that exists in your LinkedIn or your Twitter platform.
Great. I think we have time for one more question. With regards to Facebook pages, if the university has a Facebook page and there's not currently a separate one for development, what presence should development have on the university's Facebook page, and who should be the voice of development?
Another good question, and I think this takes us back to the my first recommendation in terms of how a development officer, more specifically an annual fund officer, should be thinking about leveraging these different social media platforms. And I don't necessarily think that the answer is for the development office to create their own separate social media presence. They don't necessarily need a development fan page, although after thinking about it, you may find that could be useful. But put yourself in the minds of the donors and the constituents themselves. They're going to be forming relationships to organizations and things that are important to them. So if the organization as a whole is important to them, they're probably going to want to follow the overall fan page of that organization. And that might very well be managed outside of development. Alumni relations can be a little different. Alumni are in their own right sort of a tribe, and so it might be appropriate for the alumni relations department to start a fan page. But what I would really think about is not so much creating a fan page that you can control yourself, but looking at the existing pages, whether it's in Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter, and marketing your calls and creating opportunities for people to give on those platforms.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Dan, for a great presentation. We appreciate everyone's questions and feedback. As stated previously, this coming Monday, I will send a recording of this session along with the slides and a short survey to gain your feedback. We do appreciate everyone's participation in today's session. Thank you.